We have a winner for the 2024-25 Rivalry Series, and some teams have officially punched their ticket to Milano Cortina. Of course, we have more PWHL action we will talk about on today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another edition of the Women's Hockey Report, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. And of course, we live on the Locked On NHL channel, which these days, Rachel, we're not the only international talk of the town, which I kind of love. But, Erica L. Ayala, that's me, Rachel Donner, right here, my co-host. And we have another jam-packed episode. We are going to talk international hockey. We're going to talk some PWHL hockey. And is there a little bit of a individual rivalry or bad blood, as Taylor Swift might say? We'll talk about all of that on today's show. But first, let's do a vibe check. Rachel, how you feeling?
Yeah, I'm like vacillating somewhere between the Ottawa Charge and the Minnesota Frost at the moment. After that game on Thursday night.
Absolutely. We're gonna talk about that game. That is definitely on the docket for today. For me, I kind of alluded to this, but I'm loving that other hockey fans outside of women's hockey fans are talking about and appreciating international hockey. That's of course because the Four Nations face-off is happening. And if you don't know, Rachel and I both host an NHL show, Locked On Flyers. Rachel is a co-host there, and I am the host of the Locked On Kraken podcast. So make sure you check those out. And Rachel, you're going to get to go to Four Nations, the Boston series, which is going to be awesome. I can't wait to hear about that.
Yeah, should be fun.
Yeah, indeed. But all right, we are going to get into women's hockey because continuing that theme of international hockey and, something that's a little bit more than a friendly, but not quite obviously an Olympics. We had the rivalry series. The 5-game series did culminate with Canada on top. Rachel, what was your takeaway from that fifth and final deciding game? And then your thoughts overall on the series.
Yeah, it was really interesting because first off, like Erin Frankel, like my God, like she faced 43 shots in that last game. And, I think that like with Team Canada being Team Canada, the way they are and how strong they are and how much they press, I think that even a top flight performance in net like that isn't going to be enough, that you have to be strong defensively as a team. And I think ultimately the United States just wasn't quite there in the same way that they had been in some of the previous games.
And it's something that we talked about last week, right, Rachel? We said that, behind Gwyneth Phillips, this USA team kind of hunkered down defensively, which is not something that we see often from USA hockey, women's, men's at any stage at the in international competition. So I wonder what's going on there. Of course, the coaching staff is not new. There, we've seen them come through at least one on the back end of one Olympic cycle. But is it maybe more personnel related? I don't know. It's been a little bit of a different look for USA hockey.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that there's the thing that's been missing for me is that they just can't play complete games anymore. It just, I mean, not that they could consistently ever, but it just feels more evident now that whatever personnel they've put together, like can't work in a cohesive system for extended periods of time. And I think that's what hurts them defensively more than anything. They always seem to be on their heels in a way that I think past USA teams were not.
Yeah, I think for me, what you just said, the underlining thing there is on the defensive side. And I think it's fair to say that there have been those of us, I'm raising my hand for those audio listeners, that have questioned the USA defense. I think sometimes the offense just cleans a lot of that up. And so I think it's also the field, and in this case, it's just Hockey Canada that they're playing against. But I do wonder if this is something that the United States will also have to reconcile when it comes to women's worlds. And, John Robolowski, I always say his name wrong. It doesn't roll off my tongue very well. So I apologize, John W. It's never easy to lose a game like this. Our team played hard. We'll continue to evaluate and make sure we're ready heading into women's worlds in April. Now, again, nothing that is, it's a, big alarm bell here. It's just a little bit of a different look for this team. We mentioned Aaron Frankel, though, but what was going on the Canadian side? We talked about who would we actually see in net. It was indeed Emmerich Mashmeyer, which we both thought would be the case. And
Right.
between Mash not seeing nearly as many shots as Aaron Frankel, but what did you see from the goaltending and then moving up?
Yeah, that's a big question for me as we look forward to women's worlds because rivalry series is a 5-game tournament, right?
Mhm,
So Mashmeyer played 2 of the games and Renee Debian played 3 of the games.
mhm,
In 3 games, Debian faced 55 shots total. In 2 games, so in one less game, Mashmeyer faced 66 shots,
hmm.
right? So there was a huge discrepancy between the experiences that each of them got. And so to me, I go with Mashmeyer for Worlds based on international competition. However, Mashmeyer, when we talk about the PWHL, plays on like a weaker team overall in Ottawa and hasn't like racked up the wins in the same way that Anne Renee Debian has on Montreal. And so like which are they going to consider over the other going into that tournament? I think that's a really interesting question.
I think the stat that stands out is how you do under pressure. That's how I would evaluate things.
Yeah.
And to your point, Emmerich Mashmeyer is a more integral piece of an Ottawa win, arguably, than and Renee Debien. And it might sound or seem harsh, but there's a lot more that gets done before you get to the blue paint for Montreal, who again we'll talk about a little bit later, than in the case of Ottawa. Although they may be bucking that trend, Rachel, question mark. We'll talk about that coming up.
Yeah.
But I think it is a fascinating, and I feel like we've alluded to this before. Emmerich Mashmeyer, I trust Mash like to get it done. And Renee
Yep.
Debien is a solid goaltender, and I think continually finds herself in positions where when the team in front of her is playing great, she she happens to be a net. So, I don't think I don't know. It is interesting. It is definitely interesting. And I think that we've also kind of wondered what that will look like for the United States, because if you did want to look at PWHL wins, you don't have the same bounty of of a quote unquote issue when it comes to picking. Do you want someone who has more wins or more saves and has more shots faced? I think that the goaltending situation is a little different. So it'll be interesting though to see if and how the PWHL impacts what we see at
Right.
Worlds. So, and then of
Exactly.
course we'll have a whole nother season, which will in theory, right, be interrupted by the next Olympics. But speaking of the next Olympics, we do have some teams that have qualified. I do want to just put a little note here on the rivalry series because we're going to come back to this, Rachel, when it comes to PWHL action. But is there a little bad blood between specific players on Team USA and Hockey Canada that has maybe bubbled over into PWHL play? You're going to have to stick around to find out. But let's talk about some teams who the United States and Canada will play in Milano Cortina, because they too have qualified during this most recent international break for the PWHL.
Yeah, so we have Germany and Sweden and Japan will definitely be in the tournament there. Japan won the Group G tournament there and is the lone representative of Asia in their, you know, uh, China did qualify for the World Championship, but Japan is going to be in the Olympics, which I think is really interesting there. Now, as far as the other teams, it's the ones we already know about, but there's sort of an asterisk there with Russia
Yeah.
because the IIHF hasn't definitively said there. It's not very likely that Russia will participate, and if they do, it'll be under like
Russian
some
athletes or
Russian
athletes from
athlete,
Russia. Yeah, whatever it
yeah,
is. Yeah.
some umbrella thing that's Russia,
Yeah.
but not Russia kind of thing without the anthem and no
Yeah.
Russian flag or whatever.
Yeah.
But if Russia is not going to participate, then France is the alternate country that will participate, which is like, I love to see that if it
I
actually
know.
takes place.
I know. Like, I will say, sure, there are some athletes who very vehemently share the political climate and the beliefs of their country while representing their country. And there are some things that are done at the international stage from a political, social, economical standpoint that I just find it really difficult to place the burden on athletes. This is a broad statement, right? This is a broad statement. So, I don't know. My heart always goes out to athletes who train really hard, and then the political climate is just not favorable for them to compete. And I'm with you. I would love to see France. And right now, the IIHF, so the International Ice Hockey Federation, who organizes the qualifiers for the Olympics, they have banned Russia and Belarus. So that's women's and men's. The women's team for Russia, I believe, is ranked sixth overall in the world. So that would put them in the 10 team field for the Olympics. Now, the IOC, though, will have the final say, Rachel. So we're a little
Oh,
ways out. There is a changing of the guard happening at the IOC. So will the new president, who will likely be a man, I mean, it will be a man. Anyway, I said what I said. The new president what will their stance be? I guess we have to wait to find out, but we really won't know until next month. So we're still a little bit of a ways away. How does that impact an athlete, though, from France, from Russia, from the fields, especially for those teams that are right on the cusp? I do wonder. And we do have some athletes in the PWHL. Chloe Rod stands out to me as one of the players. We know that Taylor Baker plays for Hungary. They did not qualify, but were a part of qualifiers. There's just all these athletes representing different countries in the qualifiers, and to kind of not know after going through an Olympic qualifier, I feel like that's got to be like really nerve wracking.
when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the games, even if you miss the opening tip off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback. You can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit fanduel.com to join today. That's fanduel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Hey, thanks again for joining us here on the Women's Hockey Report. We come to you every Saturday morning on the Locked On NHL channel. Rachel Donner and I, Erica L. Ayala, we are your guides through women's hockey, this weekly update. And now it's time to talk PWHL because we got back into action. We gave our picks for games of the week last week, as we do every week. So we'll do that again. But I do think we have to talk about Ottawa. Okay. We've already divulged, Rachel, that you and I both have a little bit of a soft spot for the Ottawa Charge.
We
Um,
do.
We do. And so we anytime we can talk about a last place team in a positive way, we're going to do it. We're going to take that. And I think it's so wild that Ottawa, they do find themselves in the bottom of the basement, but they also now have the record for most goals scored in a single PWHL game when they get an 8-3 win this past weekend over Minnesota of all teams, which I think is really interesting. And so this game also has the record for the PWHL for most combined goals, 11 goals overall in this game. Let's break this one down.
Yeah, it's interesting because, not to talk about the Frost on, first here, but they had a rough week, right? Because only 2 days earlier, they lost a heartbreaker in OT to the Toronto Scepters, in which, the Scepters came from behind in the second period and scored 2 goals. Then Renata Fast scored in overtime to win it with like literally 4 seconds left on the clock. Like drama, right? So you're Minnesota and you have to kind of rally from that. You go to Ottawa, last place team in the league, and you're thinking, okay, this is a place where we can kind of redeem ourselves. And Ottawa was like, we're ready and rested, right?
Yeah.
So it really felt like one of those things where Ottawa really took like lessons from what Toronto did in order to shut Minnesota down. And Minnesota, to be fair to them, was operating on less rest than Ottawa was.
I mean, hey, that's kind of the game within the game, right?
I
And
know. I know.
you got to give stick taps to the coaching staff and the prep team for Ottawa because, like you said, they had them ready to go. It's sometimes I don't always agree with this when I hear it in hockey, specifically the NHL, but every once in a while you'll hear an analyst or someone on a broadcast talk about a trap game. Well, this was a big old trap.
Yeah.
This was a big old trap for Minnesota, and Ottawa capitalized. So Teresa Vanishova, who also plays for Team Czechia, got her first hat trick in her PWHL career. Only the second player this season to get a hat trick. Marie-Philippe Poulin got a hat trick for Montreal. And I love Vanishova's game. So again, part of the reason I always want to see Ottawa do well is because I just love Vanishova's game. She had that game-winning goal in the last ever Isabel Cup championship for Toronto. She also, Rachel, we were talking about this. She's so interesting because she is a hard-nosed player, unassuming by her kind of build, especially comparative to some of the other players who we know are big physical players. But she wraps up the Pims for sure.
She does. She has the most penalty minutes in the league, like by a lot. It's not even close.
Yeah. So yeah.
It is her style of play, though. That is for sure.
Indeed. But this is the first win in 4 games for the Ottawa Charge. So here's the big question for this segment and this part of this segment. Is this just an anomaly, like a blip, an outlier blip for Ottawa, Rachel? Or is this maybe them starting to turn things around?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's probably a little of both, right? Because are they going to score 8 goals again? Not likely,
Yeah.
right? But I do think this is something that's a confidence builder kind of game that can push them, toward, I think, more solid play. And I think when you look at them playing, one of the top teams in the league and really like tamping down their offense to a large degree, I think, that third goal at the end was kind of a let up at the end, which they can't do in the grand scheme of things. But I do think that, especially because Ottawa had lost their previous game to Toronto and it was a closer game than it might have appeared. Like, I think this has to be a game that turns them around a little bit. It's not that it has to. That's like the bottom line.
Oh, for sure. I agree with you. We're not gonna see. I'd be shocked, right, if we see 8 goals, especially because coming into that game against Minnesota, they were averaging not even 2 goals per game. They had 8 goals in their previous 7 games, Rachel. So I mean, the dam opened up for sure, and not likely that we're going to see that again. I do think it has to be. It has to be a confidence booster. We've seen though that Ottawa has clearly struggled with consistency because there are times, which is why this is such a puzzling team for me, Rachel, right? There are times where they look like they are a team that wants to be about it. They want to hit the ice and really, muck it up, a la Vanishova, and they have the personnel, they can do that, but it's the consistency. And I don't know if this is out of pocket, but maybe even like the collective maturity or veteran presence, like as a whole to really solidify their identity. But they just aren't able to tap into that best part of their game with enough consistency to be a contender here. So they've got a lot of work to do. But again, this absolutely has to be them turning the tide. So, what is realistic for how they move forward? I guess we'll find out. But they did keep the Minnesota Frost scoreless on the power play. So you love that they're able to get
Yeah.
things done on the PK. They scored one power play goal of their 8. So that's something good as well. And just really good performances overall from some of their key players, with obviously Vanishova leading that. Gabby Hughes had 2 goals. Brienne Jenner gets things going for them. Emily Clark was a +3. Aneta Terelova was a +4 and had 2 assists as a defender for the Ottawa Charge. So very curious to see how things move for them. We kind of joked about this or mentioned it in passing. If Ottawa cannot climb in the ranks, I think this is also the kind of game, Rachel, that should they be the first team eliminated from the playoffs, that they have to keep in their back pocket,
Yep.
because their draft pick for the upcoming draft for next season will be determined by how many points they get after their official mathematic elimination from the playoffs, if it gets to that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
I mean, but that being said, we might be jumping the gun here because although the Ottawa Charge, although the Ottawa Charge are in the basement, and that's really coming from their win percentage. They have more games played than the New York Sirens and the Boston Fleet, who also sit at 20 points. We've got 3 teams that sit at 20 points, and the Toronto Scepters are in the top 3, Rachel, with 21 points. So
Right.
it's basically like 4 teams.
Yep. Yep. I mean, obviously with the games played, but we're past halfway through the season. So, each game gets progressively more and more important. And,
Yep.
the Boston Fleet, I mean, along with Montreal, but more importantly for the Boston Fleet, who are like on that playoff bubble right
Mhm.
now, they have games in hand and they need to take
Yeah.
advantage of them.
Yeah, that's huge and might be something that we talk about when we pick our game of the week. And again, we've got some spiciness to talk about, a little bit of bubbling over from Rivalry Series into PWHL. We'll get into that. But first, we also want to mention that there have been some roster updates. We talked about this last week, Rachel. We didn't get the news, even though I had reached out to Hockey Canada, but we got the news officially from the Toronto Scepters that Sarah Nurse on LTIR, that injury from the Rivalry Series, did prove to be significant. So not only was she out for Team Canada in their win in Game 5, but she will be out for the foreseeable future for the Toronto Scepters. They sign Laura Klug to replace Sarah Nurse. I mean, that's pretty significant. It has the potential to be very significant for the Scepters.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, given everything, they could not have asked for better timing in terms of the return of Natalie Spooner.
There you go.
Because, and I posted this, but what I would not give to see Sarah Nurse and Natalie Spooner
I
at the same
know.
time. But I was really impressed with Spooner's return to play. The fact that they put her out there for over 21 minutes, what
Mhm.
like her first game back, I was honestly a little surprised by that. But she slotted right in on that top line with Hannah Miller, and she got her first assist back in action, and I thought she had a really good game.
It was solid, and I think it shows the kind of player that Natalie Spooner is. Over at the Kraken, we have our head coach that calls certain players gamers. Yeah, Natalie Spooner is a gamer for sure. Like you mentioned, playing on that top line, Hannah Miller had a 2-goal game. Daryl Watts extended a 5-game now point streak. And Spooner, after the game, saying it was definitely an adjustment. And I think it will take a few games to get really back to feeling like myself. But I think the Toronto Scepters, given everything that we just talked about, Rachel, will take this version of Spooner for as long as they can have her. If she's not even herself yet, like, oof, that's scary. And we know what Spooner did last season. So, but she said she's just excited for the next game now. So that's exciting. That's just good for women's hockey. Love to see Natalie Spooner. I think she's just a really good injection of positivity and just like passion and joy for the game, not just for the Scepters, but for the women's game. She's been that for a long time. Speaking about passion and joy for the game, okay, as much as the Charge hold a special place in my heart, this one hits close to home. I know how you feel about Boston as like a place, as a concept, Rachel, but
Right.
I'm leaning into this one all the way. As a New Yorker, Jillian Dempsey signed to a 10-day
Yes.
contract. I want more of this. Pump this into my veins. I've been waiting for this ever since we knew that Jillian Dempsey was making a return to Boston.
Yeah, I think it's huge, and I think it's great for the league to have that veteran presence there, and she's just a through line in women's hockey for
Yep.
me in general, and so I'm warming up to Boston from a women's hockey
Now,
perspective a little bit, but
right.
still extremely unfortunate that Hannah Bilka is
Yeah.
injured, and that's the reason why we're here, but
Yeah.
I
That's tough.
if we have to be here, like, Jillian Dempsey is absolutely the right choice to bring in for Boston.
Absolutely. Only a 10-day, so we'll see what happens from there. But as you mentioned, unfortunately, Hannah Bilka, on also on the long-term injured reserve. But Boston gets back a Clarkson Cup champion, a 3-time Isabel Cup champion, and the NWHL/PHF all-time leading scorers with 146 points in 142 games. So that's awesome. And the beat goes on, as it was once sung. Minnesota also, unfortunately, has a player on the long term injured reserve, Natalie Butchbinder, actually retroactive, Rachel, to over a month ago, January 8th. So they took some time to figure out the full assessment, what they wanted to do here. Suffered an upper body injury in a game against Boston, who we just mentioned. So it's Charlotte Akervik. Now, this is not a 10-day, Rachel. This is a standard player agreement. So she will be joining the team for the rest of the season. And again, we hate that some of this news or all of this news is coming because of injuries, but at the same time, it is an opportunity for other players to step up, including for Montreal. They also have a defender that they are bringing in. Kellyanne Nadeau will join the team, and this is unfortunately a replacement for Catherine, Dubois, who is on the LTIR. This is an injury suffered against New York on February 2nd. Interesting, though, that they bring in a defender here, because if I'm not mistaken, yes, Catherine Dubois is a forward. So maybe they saw a need that, again, this unfortunate injury provided an opportunity for Montreal.
Yeah, I think so, and, there's also the way they work with the reserve player squad,
Yeah.
this is, like, moving up from that, so they have the flexibility if they need it from the reserve player squad, for sure.
Yeah, indeed. All right. So we've given you a breakdown of the Olympics. We, of course, talked about the rivalry series. What's going on in Ottawa, and can it last? Unfortunately, probably not. But that means, Rachel, that all we have left to do is give a taste of what is on tap for the PWHL this coming week until our next episode. And we have our picks for game of the week coming up. All right, Rachel, we're going to close out the show as we always do, talking about the game of the week. First, we'll run through the standings. No 3 stars this week because there was that international break. So we will get back and resume that on the next episode. But plenty of games this week. We kick off as far as today, just coming up in a little bit here on Saturday, New York taking on Montreal. We also have over the weekend Minnesota at Boston. We have Toronto at Ottawa. And then for the week, we have Boston at New York, Minnesota at Montreal, Toronto at New York, and Boston at Ottawa. Those are all the games that will take place before our next episode. Do you have a feel or a vibe on not only what's your game of the week, but maybe, and this might be a different answer, but is there a team that really needs to have a show me week? Like they have to show us what they're really about with the games that they have this coming week.
Yeah, so just adding a little asterisk that we don't know the results of the Boston at Toronto game last night as of this recording.
Yeah.
And that is a very important game in and of itself, just because Boston and Toronto are bubble teams.
Yeah.
Right. But, when you look ahead to Toronto facing Ottawa, like this is Ottawa's next game after this big win over Minnesota that we just talked about. And I think that's going to be huge for them in terms of showing some consistency, facing a team in Toronto that has been steadily improving, I think, despite the Sarah Nurse injury.
Yeah.
I think there's been definite improvements to their overall game. Like, this can't be the brick wall that Ottawa runs into. And if they do, that's going to be very huge because, again, we're past halfway in the season. So that game, I think, is very important. Toronto visiting Ottawa for both teams.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, everything that you said. And then again, you bring in that Natalie Spooner getting back into hockey fitness, hockey shape. That's huge. For me, show me week. I think that in some ways it almost is Toronto. I don't know if it's necessarily pressure. I think I see it more as opportunity because again, Natalie Spooner is a huge get. If she even gives a quarter of what she gave last year to be the scoring champion, this might be the surge that Toronto was looking for. So I think that's my show me pick. I think for my pick for game of the week, I'm going Minnesota Montreal. I'm going to go back to the top of the table. And that's because this is a double whammy for either team, but especially Montreal. They can create even more separation, Rachel, and keep Minnesota, at least in that head-to-head, from getting any points. That, of course, would mean they'd have to win in regulation. But right now, the Montreal Victoire, they have 31 points in the standings to Minnesota's 26. So we've been keeping up with this week by week, and we are starting to see that separation. Can Montreal really hit the gas, or is this a bounce back for Minnesota for all of the things that we mentioned earlier in the episode? But there might be another reason, Rachel, why people might want to circle this. And if you like drama, we don't know exactly what's going on, but many people have observed, Rachel, that there's a little bit of extra juice maybe when Britta Curl plays against Marie-Philippe Poulin and also has gotten into a few tiffs with Sarah Fillier.
Yeah, so I think this is where we talked about earlier, where the rivalry series and the USA-Canada rivalry can spill over into the PWHL just because these players are so used to playing each other all the time. And then, you have the PWHL being a a 6-team league, right? So you play each other over and over and over again, and emotions are heightened. But with Brita Curl in particular, there's something extra spicy here. And I think, you look at Marie-Philippe Poulin decking her in an earlier rivalry series game, as so there's some additional physical play there. And you look in the most recent rivalry series game where Brita Curl actually pretty much leveled Sarah Fillier. Like, it was just like a full on takedown,
Yeah.
like using her arm, and it was inappropriate. I think it should have gotten called. It did not. So there's a lot of that going on, and you saw some Ottawa fans not reacting pleasantly to all of that in their game against Minnesota, which also has some Canada versus USA overtones to it.
Oh, for
So
sure.
yeah, so there's a lot going on there, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on as the season progresses.
Yeah, and I think what stands out to me from what you're saying from the PWHL perspective is, again, this is a league where through the rule book, they've opened up physical play more than we've seen in other iterations, certainly of a North American based hockey league. But I think there's also maybe an opportunity for the game to legally, I guess, per the rule book, get a little physical. So some of the things maybe you don't want to do or you don't feel that you can do in a rivalry series game, which will follow international rules. Are we going to see some of that spill over? I don't know. We'll see. I think it's also worth noting that, Brita Curl can be a divisive hockey player for a lot of different reasons on and off of the ice. So we don't know right now what's going down, but we will keep our finger on the pulse and see if we can figure out what exactly is the rub here, and how long will it last. So we've given you our picks for game of the week. We'll see indeed how these games do impact the tilt for our next episode. But for Rachel Donner, Erica L. Ayala, we are closing out the women's hockey report for this episode. But make sure you join us next week and every Saturday as we bring you news from the women's hockey community, international, of course, PWHL, and every once in a while, especially as we get closer to March, we'll sprinkle in some NCAA as well. But again, for Rachel, Erica here, and I hope you enjoy the game. Go watch the PWHL game coming up, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.